Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for coming by Be Terrible Movies. I'm Jeremy, and on this review, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different and reviewing Season 1 of AMC's Preacher. So this is produced by Adam Goldstein and Seth Rogen, and it's their first foray into both television as producers and what I would consider like horror genre, because they're known pretty much for their comedies. It opens up in a small town, and Dominic Cooper is the preacher of a small congregation. It's like a shack of a church, and he's got like 5 or 6 members in there. A girl named Tulip has showed back up into town. She is his ex-girlfriend, on again, off again girlfriend forever, and there's allusions to a shady past that they may have. We're also introduced to a character named Cassidy, and real early on, I want to say like the first or second episode, we find out that Cassidy is a vampire. And it's a very unique spin on the vampire, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But what happens is Preacher is bestowed with the power of persuasion, essentially. Anything he says to somebody, they have to take it literally when he says it in this specific voice. And as a preacher, he thinks that it is a sign from God, or that God is actually speaking through him. Well, these 2 men in suits and cowboy hats show up, and they want this power back. They refer to it as the Genesis, and they also tell him that they're angels and that they were sent by God to get this gift back from Preacher. He's, like I said, reluctant because he honestly believes that this was God's plan for him. And as all of this is going on, his congregation is growing and growing, and he's getting more popular in town. And there's a lot of dramatic elements in this story kind of woven throughout. Some comic book fans or fans of the original graphic novel that it's based on have kind of criticized the show because the comic book series is a road series, or like a road story where the characters are traveling the whole time. Well, season 1 of Preacher all took place in this town. And I was actually watching Talking Preacher with Chris Hardwick and some of the cast of the show, including Seth Rogen. And Chris Hardwick kind of asked them their motivation for, including this whole almost prologue to the graphic novel. And I thought that the answer that they gave made a lot of sense, because there are supposedly some very dark and crazy elements in the comic. In television, it may be hard to kind of root for or follow these characters without a little bit of backstory and character building ahead of time. So essentially, they wanted to show Preacher as a preacher, where in the comic book, he's never actually shown as a preacher. And they wanted to kind of develop what this town was, what the values of the people were. We keep getting this flashback to the Old West, and there's like this gunslinger, a grizzled old man who is roaming through the desert for unknown reasons at first. We're going to talk and get into some spoilers, so if you do want to, tune out and come back and check it out after you've seen the show, that would be cool. The video will still be here, but so this gunslinger, his storyline in the West, it ties into what's going on in the primary storyline, and we understand that, as well as we also see glimpses of Preacher's past and his relationship with his father, who was also a preacher, and the way that that affected him and molded who he was. Like I'd mentioned, the character Tulip, who is a total badass in this TV series. She's actually one of my favorite parts about it. But she and Preacher had an on-again, off-again relationship, and there was something that happened in Texas where there's a guy named Carlos. They were all involved in a heist. He ended up taking off and leaving them there, where Tulip ended up losing her baby, which caused her to want to get revenge on Carlos. That's what brings her back to Preacher, and she finds out that he's living this totally different life from when they used to be like almost Pulp Fiction style criminals to now he is a preacher, with this moral compass, and she's not buying any of it. And then we've got Cassidy, who actually becomes best friends with Preacher, and he is a couple 100-year-old vampire who has to feed on blood to survive, but he's unlike other vampires that we've seen, most notably because he doesn't have fangs, which, compare it to Twilight if you want, this is definitely not that kind of vampire. He can go out in the sun, however, he doesn't sparkle. He's got to wear like sunglasses and a hat and be covered up or put on suntan lotion or sunblock, or he's going to burn up in the sun. So there's a little bit of differences there. There's also a character named Eugene. He's very iconic. He also goes by Arseface. I think a lot of people actually really liked him from the comics because it's such a bizarre character. He tried to kill himself and stuck a shotgun in his mouth, and now his whole like face is puckered in, and he's got this crazy lisp, and he's kind of been the moral center of the show so far. He's like a beacon of light or a beacon of hope in this really bleak show. And I think that some critics might not love it because of the pacing, but I think the cinematography is fantastic. I really like the central cast, all four of the main characters. Jackie Earle Haley is introduced as a villain in this season. Well, he wants to take Preacher's church, which Preacher made a deal with him thinking that he could use that power. And for some reason, it doesn't, because he says to worship God. Well, Jackie Earle Haley's character has a different God, so it doesn't work for him. He ends up worshiping his God of meat, and now he's going to take the church from Jesse, which is Preacher. And that sets off a ton of chain reactions, all sorts of different events, and it all leads to a showdown. And Jesse, apparently, because of his life of crime, he's like a badass of a shot and a fighter and all of this stuff that typically preachers aren't. Preacher condemns Eugene to hell because he's just getting frustrated with him. Well, Eugene ends up disappearing. Well, Eugene's father is the town sheriff, so now the town sheriff is involved. He's pursuing Preacher. Preacher says, I'm going to come to church on Sunday, and I'm going to show you all God. And he's on the run because the sheriff's trying to find him in relation to Eugene's disappearance. Well, he finally arrives, Sunday finally comes, and he comes into the church and is able to commune with an entity. We believe it's God. Everybody in the church sees this illuminating light and are almost blinded by it, so it must be God. And then we find out that it's some other character who also is from heaven, who's been told to pretend like he's God because God is missing. Well, now this town has totally lost their moral compass, and without a God there to hold them accountable, they all start going crazy, and the whole town is completely demolished, which puts our three main characters back on the road, which is where the comic book actually starts out. So yeah, all in all, I had fun with this season. It hooked me pretty early, and I will say it started off a lot stronger than it ended up. I didn't feel like the end was very gratifying, but it's a TV series. It wasn't actually the end at all. It left on a cliffhanger, and I feel like its strange tone and just how distinctly different it is from anything else I've ever seen makes it definitely worth a watch. Plus, I'm not 6 seasons behind it like I am something like Game of Thrones, so I wanted to share my thoughts with you guys. Hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, do me a favor, go ahead and click that like button. It'll just take you a second. While I have you here, check out some other reviews. Houston did one for the TV series Stranger Things, which is available on Netflix, so you can check that one out. But most importantly, until next time, be terrible.